The cleaner discovered a secret love letter from the billionaire, but what she did next changed their lives forever. The rhythmic hum of the vacuum cleaner filled the opulent office as Maggie Thompson meticulously worked her way around the room. At 52, she had been cleaning the offices of Starling Enterprises for over a decade, but never had she felt as invisible as she did now. The company's recent acquisition by tech mogul Adrian Reeves had brought an air of change and uncertainty that seemed to permeate every corner of the building. Maggie's eyes darted to the imposing mahogany desk that dominated the center of the room. It belonged to Adrian Reeves himself, a man she had only glimpsed from afar during his rare visits to the office. His reputation preceded him: brilliant, ruthless, and notoriously private. As she maneuvered the vacuum around the desk's legs, a flash of white caught her eye. Protruding slightly from beneath the desk was a crisp envelope. Maggie hesitated, her hand hovering over the paper. It wasn't her place to touch anything on Mr. Reeves' desk, but the envelope was on the floor, her domain. With a quick glance at the closed office door, she picked it up. The envelope was unsealed, its contents peeking out temptingly. Maggie knew she should simply place it on the desk and continue with her work. But something about the delicate handwriting on the front, addressing it simply to A, made her pause. Before she could second-guess herself, Maggie gently slid the letter out. Her eyes widened as she began to read, "My dearest Adrian, I know I promised to keep my distance, but I can't bear it any longer. The stolen moments we've shared over the past year have become the very air I breathe. I know the complications, the risks to both our reputations, but I'm willing to face it all if it means we can be together." Maggie's heart raced as she realized she was holding a love letter, a secret correspondence that could potentially shake the foundations of Starling Enterprises. The letter was signed simply C.E., leaving the identity of the writer a tantalizing mystery. As she continued reading, the office door suddenly swung open. Maggie jumped, fumbling with the letter as Adrian Reeves himself strode into the room. Tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating an aura of authority, he stopped short at the sight of Maggie clutching the envelope. "What are you doing?" His voice was low, controlled, but with an edge that sent a chill down Maggie's spine. I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves," Maggie stammered, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment and fear. "I found this on the floor, and I was just—" Adrian's eyes narrowed as he recognized the envelope. In 2 swift strides, he closed the distance between them and snatched the letter from Maggie's trembling hands. His piercing gaze bore into her, as if trying to determine just how much she had read and what she intended to do with the information. Maggie's mind raced. She had never been in trouble at work before, and now she stood before one of the most powerful men in the country, caught red-handed with his personal correspondence. Her job, her livelihood, everything hung in the balance of this moment. "Mr. Reeves, I swear I didn't mean to pry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I shouldn't have read it, but I understand the position you're in." Adrian's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You understand?" he repeated, his tone a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Maggie took a deep breath, realizing this might be her only chance to salvage the situation. "I've been cleaning offices for a long time, Mr. Reeves. I've seen how lonely it can be at the top. How hard it is to find someone who sees you for who you really are, not just what you can do for them." For a moment, the mask of the ruthless businessman slipped, and Maggie caught a glimpse of the man beneath, vulnerable, conflicted, and perhaps a little lost. Adrian's grip on the letter loosened slightly. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now. Maggie Thompson." Adrian nodded slowly, as if coming to a decision. "Maggie, I think we need to have a conversation, but not here." He glanced at his watch. "Can you meet me at the Bluebird Cafe on 5th Street in an hour? I believe we have some things to discuss." Stunned, Maggie could only nod in agreement. As Adrian turned to leave, he paused at the door. "And Maggie, thank you for your discretion." With that, he was gone, leaving Maggie alone in the vast office, her head spinning with the implications of what had just transpired. She looked down at her hands, still shaking slightly, and realized that in the span of a few minutes, her entire world had shifted on its axis. As she gathered her cleaning supplies, a mix of emotions washed over her: fear, excitement, and a strange sense of purpose. Whatever Adrian Reeves wanted to discuss, Maggie knew that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The love letter that had fallen into her hands by chance now felt like a key, unlocking a door to a world she had only ever observed from the outside. With one last glance around the immaculate office, Maggie stepped out, leaving behind the familiar routine of her old life and stepping into the unknown. The Bluebird Cafe awaited, and with it, a conversation that promised to alter the course of not just her future, but perhaps that of Adrian Reeves as well. As she made her way out of the building, the weight of the secret she now carried settled upon her shoulders. Maggie Thompson, the invisible Faxinera, had suddenly become a keeper of one of the most valuable secrets in the corporate world. And as she stepped out onto the bustling street, she couldn't help but wonder, what would she do with this newfound power, and how would it change the lives of everyone involved? The city pulsed around her, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its midst. In just 1 hour, Maggie would sit across from one of the most influential men in America, armed with knowledge that could make or break empires. As she hailed a taxi, her heart raced with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The game had changed, and Maggie Thompson was now an unwitting player in a high-stakes match of secrets, power, and unexpected alliances. The taxi sped through the streets of downtown, carrying Maggie towards her rendezvous with destiny. As the familiar landmarks of her daily life blurred past the window, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind more than just her cleaning cart. With each passing block, the Maggie Thompson who had started her day as an ordinary Faxinera was fading away, replaced by a woman on the cusp of an extraordinary journey. The Bluebird Cafe loomed ahead, its quaint blue awning a stark contrast to the sleek office buildings surrounding it. Maggie took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. As she pushed open the cafe door, the gentle tinkling of bells announced her arrival, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that promised to be filled with more twists and turns than she could ever have imagined. Maggie's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down her uniform, acutely aware of how out of place she looked amidst the polished wood and soft jazz of the Bluebird Cafe. The aroma of freshly ground coffee beans filled the air, a stark contrast to the harsh cleaning chemicals she was accustomed to. She had chosen a small table near the back, away from the windows, instinctively understanding the need for discretion. As the minute hand of the ornate clock above the counter ticked closer to the arranged meeting time, the cafe's bell chimed. Maggie's heart leapt into her throat as Adrian Reeves stepped inside, his commanding presence drawing curious glances from the other patrons. Gone was the sharp business suit from earlier. He now wore a casual blazer over a crisp white shirt, an attempt at inconspicuousness that somehow only made him stand out more. Adrian's eyes scanned the room, softening almost imperceptibly when they landed on Maggie. With measured steps, he made his way to her table, sliding into the seat across from her with fluid grace. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his voice low. "Thank you for coming." Maggie nodded, not trusting her voice just yet. Up close, she could see the fine lines of stress around Adrian's eyes, the weight of responsibility etched into his features. It humanized him in a way she hadn't expected. A waitress approached, and Adrian ordered for both of them, a bold espresso for himself and a latte for Maggie. The simple act of him remembering her preference from the office kitchen's stock list didn't go unnoticed. Once they were alone again, Adrian leaned forward, his fingers interlaced on the table. "I imagine you have questions," he began. Maggie took a deep breath. "Mr. Reeves, I want you to know that I would never—" He held up a hand, stopping her. "Please, call me Adrian, and I know you wouldn't. That's precisely why we're here." His gaze was intense, searching. "Maggie, what you stumbled upon today, it's complicated, more complicated than you could possibly imagine." The arrival of their drinks provided a momentary reprieve from the tension. Maggie wrapped her hands around the warm mug, drawing comfort from its solidity. "The letter," she said softly. "It wasn't just about an affair, was it?" Adrian's eyebrows rose slightly, impressed by her perceptiveness. No, he admitted. It wasn't. The woman who wrote that letter, let's call her Claire. She's my sister. Maggie's eyes widened in shock. Of all the scenarios she had imagined, this hadn't even crossed her mind. Your sister, she repeated, struggling to process this information. Adrian nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Half-sister, to be precise. We share a father, a fact neither of us knew until about a year ago. He paused, taking a sip of his espresso. Our father, William Starling, was not the man the public thought he was. When he died last year, his will revealed some unexpected truths. The pieces began to fall into place in Maggie's mind. Starling Enterprises, she murmured. It was your father's company. Yes, Adrian confirmed. And now it's mine. Or at least, that's what the world believes. He leaned back, his shoulders sagging slightly, as if the weight of his secret was physically pressing down on him. The truth is, my father left equal shares to both Claire and me. But Claire, she's not ready for the public scrutiny that would come with suddenly being revealed as a Starling heir. Maggie's mind raced, connecting the dots. So you've been protecting her, keeping her involvement a secret while you run the company? Adrian nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes at her quick understanding. Exactly. Claire works behind the scenes, her brilliance shaping our strategies and innovations, but officially, she doesn't exist, at least not as a Starling. And the love letter? Maggie prompted gently. A pained expression crossed Adrian's face. Claire struggles with the secrecy sometimes. The letter, it was a moment of weakness, a plea to acknowledge our relationship publicly. Consequences be damned. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of vulnerability, but we can't, not yet. The media frenzy, the corporate shark circling, it would tear her apart, and the company along with it. Maggie sat back, absorbing the magnitude of what she'd just learned. The story was like something out of a soap opera, yet the raw emotion in Adrian's eyes spoke to its truth. Why are you telling me all this? She asked softly. Adrian's gaze met hers, unwavering. Because, Maggie, I find myself in need of an ally. Someone outside of our inner circle who understands the human side of this saga, not just the corporate implications. He leaned forward, his voice earnest. Your compassion earlier, your instinctive understanding of the loneliness of my position, it showed me that you might be exactly the person we need. Maggie's breath caught in her throat. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Adrian? I want to offer you a new position, Adrian said, his tone businesslike yet tinged with hope. Officially, you'd be my personal assistant. But in reality, you'd be a confidant, a bridge between Claire and me when direct communication is too risky. You'd help maintain our secret while we prepare Claire for her eventual public role. The cafe seemed to fade away as Maggie processed the offer. It was more than a job opportunity. It was an invitation into a world she'd only ever observed from the outside. A chance to make a real difference, to be part of something bigger than herself. But it was also dangerous. Secrets had a way of coming to light, and the fallout could be catastrophic. What if I say no? She asked, needing to understand all her options. Adrian's expression remained open, free of threat or coercion. Then you walk out of here, return to your life, and I'll ensure you're generously compensated for your discretion. No repercussions, no hard feelings. Maggie nodded, appreciating his honesty. She looked down at her hands, still clad in the worn rubber gloves she'd forgotten to remove in her haste to make the meeting. These hands had scrubbed and cleaned for decades, invisible to the power players whose messes she tidied. Now, they had the potential to shape the future of one of America's largest corporations. If I say yes, she began slowly, I have conditions. Adrian's eyebrows rose, a mix of surprise and respect in his expression. Go on. First, I want to meet Claire. If I'm going to be a bridge between you two, I need to understand both sides. Maggie's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Second, I want assurances that what we're doing is legal. I won't be party to anything that could land me in jail. Adrian nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Done and done. Anything else? Maggie took a deep breath. Yes. I want your word that when this all comes to light, because eventually it will, you'll stand by me. That you'll remember it was an act of kindness, not malice, that brought me into this. For a long moment, Adrian simply looked at her, as if seeing Maggie Thompson, really seeing her, for the first time. Then he extended his hand across the table. You have my word, Maggie. Partners? Maggie looked at the offered hand, manicured, powerful, worlds away from her own work-worn fingers. Then, with a sense of stepping off a cliff and learning to fly, she grasped it firmly. Partners, she agreed, as their hands clasped, sealing a pact that would change both their lives irrevocably. The bustle of the cafe faded back into focus around them. The other patrons continued their conversations, oblivious to the momentous agreement that had just been struck in their midst. Maggie Thompson, who had entered the Bluebird Cafe as a faxinera with an uncertain future, would leave it as the keeper of one of corporate America's biggest secrets. The weight of her new reality settled on her shoulders, equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. As Adrian began to outline the first steps of their new arrangement, Maggie allowed herself a small, secret smile. She had no idea where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The game had changed, and Maggie Thompson was no longer content to be a spectator. She was ready to play. The next morning dawned with a surreal quality for Maggie. As she stood outside the imposing glass and steel structure of Starling Enterprises, she couldn't help but feel like an imposter. Gone was her familiar cleaning uniform, replaced by a crisp blouse and pencil skirt that Adrian had arranged to be delivered to her modest apartment. The clothes felt foreign on her body, a physical reminder of the monumental change her life had undergone in less than 24 hours. Taking a deep breath, Maggie pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby. The security guard, who had barely glanced at her for years, now stood at attention as she approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said, handing her a new security badge. "Mr. Reeves asked me to ensure you received this. You'll have full access to the executive floor now." Maggie nodded, trying to project a confidence she didn't quite feel. "Thank you, Jim," she replied, grateful that she had always made an effort to learn the names of her fellow service workers. The elevator ride to the top floor was swift and silent, giving Maggie a moment to collect her thoughts. As the doors slid open, she stepped into a world she had only glimpsed during her early morning or late-night cleaning shifts. The executive floor buzzed with an energy that was palpable, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and the low murmur of high-stakes conversations. Adrian's assistant, former assistant, Maggie corrected herself, greeted her with a tight smile. "Ms. Thompson, Mr. Reeves is expecting you. Please, follow me." As they walked through the open office space, Maggie felt the weight of curious stares. Whispers followed in their wake, and she caught fragments of speculation about her sudden appearance in the executive suite. Squaring her shoulders, she focused on the task ahead, reminding herself that she had earned this opportunity, unconventional though it may be. Adrian's office was even more impressive in the light of day. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while modern art pieces adorned the walls, each probably worth more than Maggie's yearly salary. Adrian himself stood behind his desk, his phone to his ear as he concluded a call. As Maggie entered, he held up a finger, signaling her to wait a moment. "Yes, that's correct. We'll proceed with the merger as planned. Thank you." Hanging up, he turned his full attention to Maggie, a warm smile breaking through his professional demeanor. "Maggie, good morning. I trust you found everything in order?" She nodded, still feeling slightly overwhelmed. "Yes, thank you. The clothes, the badge, it's all a bit surreal, to be honest." Adrian's expression softened. "I understand. It's a big change, but I have full confidence in you." He gestured to a sleek laptop on the corner of his desk. "This is for you. It's been set up with all the necessary software and security protocols. You'll find a preliminary schedule and a list of tasks to get you started." As Maggie moved to take the laptop, Adrian's phone buzzed. Glancing at it, a flicker of emotion. Was it anticipation? Worry? Crossed his face. "It's Claire," he said softly. "She's on her way up." Maggie's heart rate quickened. Meeting Claire had been one of her conditions, but now that it was about to happen, she felt woefully unprepared. "What do you say to a secret heiress whose private correspondence you've read?" Before she could dwell on it further, the office door opened, and a woman stepped in. Claire Starling was not what Maggie had expected. Where Adrian exuded corporate power, Claire radiated a quieter, more intellectual energy. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes, while clearly expensive, were chosen for comfort rather than statement. "Adrian, I got your message. What's so urgent that—" Claire stopped short as she noticed Maggie. Her eyes, a striking green that contrasted sharply with Adrian's blue, darted between them, a mix of confusion and wariness in her gaze. Adrian moved smoothly to make introductions. "Claire, this is Maggie Thompson." "Maggie, my sister, Claire Starling." Claire's eyebrows shot up. "You told her?" The question was directed at Adrian, but her eyes remained fixed on Maggie, assessing. "I had to," Adrian replied calmly. "Maggie, came across your letter." A flush crept up Claire's neck. "Oh, God," she murmured, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, there was a steely resolve in her gaze. "And now what? Blackmail? A payout to keep quiet?" "Claire," Adrian started, but Maggie stepped forward, finding her voice. "Miss Starling, I assure you, that's not why I'm here." She met Claire's gaze steadily. "Your brother has offered me a job to help both of you navigate this situation. I understand the weight of the secret I'm now part of, and I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to protect it." Claire studied her for a long moment, then turned to Adrian. "A Faxinera? Really, Adrian? Of all the people you could have brought into this?" "She showed kindness when she could have exploited the situation," Adrian cut in. "And more importantly, she understands discretion and loyalty in a way few others in our circle do." Maggie felt a surge of gratitude at Adrian's defense, but she knew she needed to stand on her own merit. "Ms. Starling, I may not have a fancy degree or a background in corporate politics, but I do have years of experience in observing people at their most unguarded moments. I've cleaned the offices of CEOs and interns alike, and I've learned that integrity isn't determined by job title or bank balance." Claire's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Call me Claire," she said after a pause. "If we're going to be working together, formalities seem a bit redundant." She moved to the large conference table in the corner of the office, gesturing for Maggie and Adrian to join her. As they settled into their seats, Claire leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "All right, Maggie, you know our secret. What do you propose we do now?" Maggie took a deep breath, acutely aware that this was her moment to prove her worth. "First, we need to establish a secure method of communication between the three of us, something that can't be traced or hacked." She glanced at Adrian. "I assume the company's regular channels aren't secure enough?" Adrian nodded approvingly. "Correct. Too many eyes, too many opportunities for leaks." "Okay," Maggie continued, her confidence growing. "Then we create a cover story for my presence here, something that explains my sudden promotion without raising suspicion. Maybe a mentorship program for long-term employees." Claire nodded slowly, a hint of respect in her eyes. "Not bad. It's believable and might even generate some positive PR for the company." As they continued to brainstorm, Maggie found herself slipping into a rhythm with the Starling siblings. Claire's brilliant analytical mind complemented Adrian's strategic thinking, and Maggie's practical, ground-level perspective helped bridge the gap between high-level planning and real-world implementation. Hours passed unnoticed as they worked, ordering in lunch and barely pausing as they mapped out the next few months. They created coded language for different scenarios, established dead drops for physical document exchanges, and even planned for worst-case scenarios should their secret be exposed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, Claire leaned back in her chair, a look of grudging admiration on her face. "I have to hand it to you, brother," she said, her eyes on Maggie. "You might have actually found us an ally worth having." Maggie felt a warmth spread through her chest at the compliment. It wasn't effusive praise, but coming from Claire, she sensed it meant a great deal. Adrian smiled, the tension he'd been carrying in his shoulders all day finally easing. "I think we've made excellent progress. Maggie, why don't you take the rest of the evening to settle into your new role? Review the materials we've prepared, and we'll reconvene in the morning." As Maggie gathered her things, Claire approached her, her voice low. "I'm sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions." Maggie shook her head. "No apology necessary. I understand the need for caution." Claire nodded, then hesitated before adding, "That letter. It was a moment of weakness. I hope you don't think less of me for it." "On the contrary," Maggie replied softly, "I think it shows your humanity. In my experience, it's the people who never show vulnerability that you have to watch out for." A ghost of a smile played on Claire's lips. "You're an interesting woman, Maggie Thompson. I look forward to working with you." As Maggie left the office, her new laptop tucked securely under her arm, she felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The day had been a whirlwind of new experiences, challenges, and unexpected connections. She had entered Starling Enterprises this morning as an outsider, unsure of her place in this new world. She left it as a confidant to two of the most powerful people in the corporate world, entrusted with a secret that could reshape the entire company. Stepping out into the cool evening air, Maggie allowed herself a moment of pride. She had held her own in a room with brilliant minds and high stakes. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential pitfalls and challenges she could scarcely imagine. But for the first time in years, Maggie felt truly alive, her mind buzzing with possibilities. As she hailed a taxi, Maggie caught her reflection in a shop window. The woman looking back at her stood taller, her eyes bright with purpose. Maggie Thompson, former Faxinera, now held the key to a corporate kingdom, and she was determined to prove that sometimes the most unlikely allies could be the most valuable of all. Weeks flew by as Maggie settled into her new role at Starling Enterprises. The initial whispers and curious glances from her co-workers had faded into a general acceptance of her presence in the executive suite. To the outside world, she was Adrian Reeves, highly efficient personal assistant, always one step ahead and fiercely protective of her boss's time and privacy. But behind closed doors, she was the linchpin in a delicate balancing act, keeping the Starling siblings connected in their shared secret safe. It was a crisp autumn morning when the first real test of their arrangement came. Maggie had just finished her daily briefing with Adrian when his phone buzzed with an urgent message from Claire. "She's downstairs," Adrian said, his brow furrowing. "Says it's an emergency." Maggie was already moving, her mind racing through contingency plans. "I'll bring her up through the private elevator. Less chance of being seen." Adrian nodded, his trust in her evident. "Good thinking. I'll clear my schedule for the next hour." As Maggie made her way to the discreet elevator reserved for VIPs, she couldn't help but reflect on how much her life had changed. The woman who now navigated corporate politics with ease bore little resemblance to the Faxinera who had once been invisible in these very halls. The elevator doors slid open, revealing a visibly agitated Claire. Her usual composed demeanor was cracking at the edges, her eyes darting nervously as she stepped inside. "Claire, what's wrong?" Maggie asked, concern coloring her voice. Claire ran a hand through her hair, mussing her usually neat ponytail. "It's bad, Maggie, really bad. I think someone knows." Maggie's heart rate spiked, but years of maintaining a calm facade in tense situations kicked in. "Okay, deep breath. Let's not jump to conclusions. Tell me exactly what happened." As the elevator ascended, Claire recounted a strange interaction she'd had with a journalist at a tech conference the previous evening. "He kept asking about my background in AI development, about my connections to Starling Enterprises. It was like he was fishing for something specific." The elevator doors opened directly into Adrian's office. He was on his feet immediately, concern etched on his face as he took in Claire's disheveled appearance. "What's going on?" he demanded, looking between Claire and Maggie. Maggie quickly relayed Claire's story as they moved to the conference table, their usual spot for sensitive discussions. Adrian's face grew more serious with each word. "Did you say anything? Give him any leads?" Adrian asked, his tone sharper than usual. Claire shook her head vehemently. "Just of course not. I stuck to our cover story. Independent AI researcher, occasional consultant for various tech firms. But Adrian, he knew things. Details about projects I've only discussed with you and the core development team." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. If someone had connected Claire to Starling Enterprises, it was only a matter of time before her true identity came to light. The carefully constructed facade they'd maintained for months was in danger of crumbling. Maggie's mind was already racing, analyzing the situation from every angle. "We need to know more about this journalist. Name, publication, any connections he might have to Starling or our competitors." Adrian nodded, reaching for his phone. "I'll have our security team run a full background check. Claire, I need you to write down every question he asked, every detail you can remember about the interaction." As the siblings sprang into action, Maggie found herself in a familiar role, the calm in the storm. She moved efficiently, setting up a secure line for Adrian's call, pulling up the company's crisis management protocols on her tablet, and ensuring the office remained undisturbed by curious employees. Hours passed in a flurry of activity. Background checks were run, contingency plans were drafted and discarded, and every possible scenario was examined. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office, a clearer picture began to emerge. "All right, let's summarize what we know," Maggie said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. She'd taken on the role of facilitator, keeping the siblings focused and productive despite their mounting stress. Adrian leaned back in his chair, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. The journalist, Mark Holloway, is a freelancer with a reputation for investigative pieces on tech industry secrets. He's been sniffing around several major companies, not just us. Claire picked up the thread. His questions were probing, but not accusatory. It's possible he doesn't have concrete evidence, just suspicions. Maggie nodded, piecing it all together. "So we have a curious journalist with a hunch, but no smoking gun. The question is, do we try to throw him off the scent, or do we get ahead of this and control the narrative?" A heavy silence fell over the room as the weight of the decision pressed down on them. It was Claire who finally broke it, her voice quiet but firm. I think it's time to tell the truth." Adrian's head snapped up, surprise evident on his face. "Claire, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. Your life will change forever." Claire met her brother's gaze, a mix of fear and determination in her eyes. "I know. But living in the shadows, always looking over my shoulder, it's taking a toll, Adrian. On me, on you, on the company. Maybe it's time we face this head on." Maggie watched the siblings, feeling the shift in the room's energy. This was a pivotal moment, one that would reshape not just their lives, but the entire landscape of Starling Enterprises. "If we do this," Maggie said carefully, "we need to do it right. Control every aspect of the revelation, from the timing to the messaging." Adrian nodded slowly, his strategic mind already working on the problem. "We'll need to inform the board first, then prepare statements for the press, our employees, our partners. And we'll need to protect Claire," Maggie added firmly. "Once this news breaks, every reporter in the country will be clamoring for a piece of her. We need a plan to manage the attention without overwhelming her." Claire shot Maggie a grateful look. In the weeks they'd worked together, a bond had formed between the two women, a mutual respect that had grown into something approaching friendship. As they began to outline the monumental task ahead, Maggie felt a surge of pride in her chest. Months ago, she had been an outsider, brought into this world by chance. Now, she was an integral part of a team about to make history. The night deepened outside the office windows, but inside, a new energy pulsed through the room. Plans were made, strategies devised, and roles assigned. Maggie found herself at the center of it all, her unique perspective bridging the gap between the corporate world Adrian navigated so skillfully and the human element Claire brought to their endeavor. As dawn broke, casting a soft golden light across the city, the three of them stood together at the window, a united front facing an uncertain future. "Whatever happens," Adrian said softly, "we're in this together." Claire nodded, reaching out to squeeze her brother's hand. "Together," she echoed. Maggie stood slightly apart, still acutely aware of the class divide that separated her from the Starling siblings. But as Claire turned and pulled her into their circle, Maggie realized that some bonds transcended social boundaries. "All of us," Claire said firmly, including Maggie in her gaze. "We couldn't have gotten this far without you, Maggie." As the first rays of sunlight glinted off the surrounding skyscrapers, Maggie Thompson, once an invisible faxinera, now stood shoulder to shoulder with two of the most powerful people in the corporate world. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls. But in that moment, bathed in the warm glow of dawn, Maggie felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The day that would change everything was about to begin, and Maggie was ready to face it head-on, armed with the trust of the Starling siblings and a determination to prove that sometimes the most unlikely allies could make the most formidable team. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity at Starling Enterprises. The decision to reveal Claire's true identity set in motion a series of events that tested the limits of their preparation and resolve. Maggie found herself at the center of it all, coordinating between departments, managing the flow of information, and serving as a buffer between the increasingly stressed Starling siblings and the rest of the world. The morning of the announcement dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the tension that filled the executive floor. Maggie arrived early, her arms laden with garment bags containing carefully selected outfits for both Adrian and Claire. Today, every detail mattered. As she entered Adrian's office, she found him already there, poring over the prepared statement for what must have been the 100th time. He looked up as she entered, the dark circles under his eyes testament to another sleepless night. "Maggie," he said, his voice carrying a note of relief. "Thank God you're here. I think we need to revise the third paragraph again. It feels too—" "Adrian," Maggie cut in gently but firmly, setting down the garment bags. "The statement is perfect. We've been over it a dozen times. What you need now is to eat something and get changed. The board meeting is in an hour." He blinked, as if only just remembering the schedule they'd meticulously planned. "Right, of course. You're right." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Where's Claire? Is she ready?" As if on cue, the office door opened and Claire walked in. Unlike her usually put-together appearance, she looked pale and drawn, her hair hastily pulled back. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maggie's heart went out to her. In the weeks they'd worked together, she'd come to admire Claire's brilliant mind and quiet strength. Seeing her so vulnerable was a stark reminder of the human cost of their decision. Without hesitation, Maggie stepped forward, guiding Claire to a chair. "You can do this," she said firmly, kneeling down to meet Claire's eyes. "You are Claire Starling, brilliant AI researcher and rightful heir to Starling Enterprises. You've been preparing for this moment your entire life, even if you didn't know it." Claire's eyes welled with tears, but Maggie pressed on. "I know you're scared, but remember why we're doing this. No more hiding, no more secrets. After today, you can finally be yourself, fully and completely." Adrian moved to stand behind his sister, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Maggie's right, Claire. We're in this together, and there's no one I'd rather have by my side as we face this." For a moment, the three of them stayed like that, a tableau of support and unity. Then Claire took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "Okay," she said, a hint of her usual determination creeping back into her voice. "Let's do this." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The board meeting was tense but ultimately supportive, thanks in large part to Adrian's skillful presentation and Claire's evident expertise. Maggie watched from the sidelines, ready to step in if needed, but mostly observing the siblings in their element. As they prepared for the press conference, Maggie found herself in the unfamiliar position of being prepped by the PR team. "Remember," the head of communications said, You're part of this story now. The loyal assistant who helped keep the secret. Stick to the agreed-upon narrative, and don't let them bait you into saying more." Maggie nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. She'd spent so long being invisible, and now she was about to step into the spotlight alongside the Starlings. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The press conference was held in the grand atrium of Starling Enterprises. As Maggie stood to the side of the podium, she could feel the buzz of anticipation in the room. Journalists from every major outlet were packed in, cameras at the ready, all eager to hear the mysterious announcement that had been promised. Adrian stepped up to the microphone first, his presence commanding instant attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady and confident. "Today, Starling Enterprises is proud to make an announcement that will reshape the future of our company and the tech industry as a whole." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "For the past year, I have had the privilege of leading this company, but I have not done it alone. It is my great honor to introduce you to my partner in this endeavor, my brilliant sister, and the co-heir to Starling Enterprises, Claire Starling." A collective gasp went up from the assembled press as Claire stepped forward. She looked radiant in the outfit Maggie had chosen, projecting a quiet confidence that belied her earlier nerves. "Good afternoon," Claire said, her voice clear and strong. "I know you all have many questions, and we're here to answer them. But first, I want to tell you a story of family, of secrets, and of the incredible potential that can be unlocked when we embrace our true selves." As Claire began to recount their tale, Maggie felt a swell of pride. This was the moment they had worked towards, planned for, and agonized over, and Claire was handling it beautifully. The questions from the press came fast and furious once Claire finished her statement. Why had they kept it a secret? How had they managed to hide it for so long? What did this mean for the future of Starling Enterprises? Adrian and Claire fielded the questions with grace and honesty, neither shying away from the difficult aspects of their story nor overplaying the drama. They emphasized their commitment to transparency moving forward and their excitement about the innovations they could now pursue openly as a team. And then, unexpectedly, a question was directed at Maggie. "Ms. Thompson," a reporter called out, "as Mr. Reeves' assistant, you must have been instrumental in keeping this secret. How do you feel about your role in this deception?" For a moment, Maggie froze, the eyes of the entire room on her. But then she felt a gentle touch on her arm, Claire offering silent support. Maggie stepped forward to the microphone, drawing strength from the trust the Starlings had placed in her. "I wasn't Mr. Reeves' assistant when this began," Maggie said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "I was a faxinera, a cleaning woman. I stumbled upon this secret by chance, and I was given a choice. I chose to help, not out of deception, but out of a belief in the vision that Adrian and Claire have for this company." She paused, looking out at the sea of surprised faces. "My role has been to support two incredible individuals as they navigated an impossible situation. And in doing so, I've learned that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships can yield the most extraordinary results." As Maggie stepped back, she could feel the shift in the room. The story had just gained a new dimension, one of opportunity, of breaking barriers, of the American dream realized in the most unexpected way. The rest of the press conference passed in a blur. As it concluded, Maggie found herself enveloped in a hug by Claire, with Adrian placing a grateful hand on her shoulder. "You were amazing," Claire whispered. "Both of you," Adrian added. As they made their way back to the privacy of the executive floor, surrounded by a phalanx of security and PR staff, Maggie felt a profound sense of change. The secret was out, the truth revealed, but rather than an ending, it felt like a beginning. The elevator doors closed behind them, shutting out the clamor of the press and the weight of their long-held secret. For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the enormity of what they had just done washing over them. Then, unexpectedly, Claire began to laugh. It started as a small chuckle but quickly grew into full-bodied laughter. Adrian joined in, the tension of the past days finally breaking. And Maggie, caught up in the moment, found herself laughing too. As their laughter echoed in the confines of the elevator, Maggie realized that this was more than just relief. It was joy, the joy of finally being free to be themselves, to pursue their vision openly, to face whatever came next together. The elevator dinged, signaling their arrival at the executive floor. As the door slid open, Maggie thought back to that fateful day when she had first stepped off this elevator as Adrian's new assistant. How far they had come since then, how much had changed. Adrian turned to them both, his eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. "Well," he said, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "I think this calls for a celebration. Dinner. My treat." Claire nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, please, I'm starving." "Maggie, you'll join us, won't you?" Maggie hesitated for just a moment, old habits of knowing her place warring with the new reality of her position. But the open, expectant looks on Adrian and Claire's faces decided it for her. "I'd be honored," she said, feeling once again the thrill of stepping into a new chapter of her life. As they walked together towards Adrian's office to collect their things, Maggie marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From Faxinera to confidant, from outsider to integral part of a team that was about to change the face of the tech industry. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging. There would be skeptics to convince, competitors to outmaneuver, and a whole new set of expectations to meet. But in that moment, with the Starling siblings by her side, Maggie Thompson felt ready to face whatever came next. The secret was out, the truth revealed, and now, the real work could begin. The weeks following the revelation of Claire Starling's identity were a whirlwind of activity, excitement, and unexpected challenges. As the dust began to settle, Maggie found herself navigating a landscape that had shifted dramatically, both professionally and personally. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Adrian's office, where Maggie sat across from the Starling siblings, her tablet in hand as they discussed the day's agenda. The atmosphere was different now, more relaxed, yet charged with a new energy. "All right," Maggie began, her fingers dancing across the screen. "We've got the interview with Tech Innovator magazine at 10, followed by the board meeting at 1. Claire, your team has requested some time this afternoon to go over the latest AI developments." Claire nodded, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "Perfect. Now that we're not hiding anymore, I can't wait to share some of the breakthroughs we've been sitting on." Adrian leaned back in his chair, a proud smile playing on his lips. "I've been looking over the preliminary reports. Claire, what you've accomplished. It's going to revolutionize the industry." Maggie couldn't help but smile at the siblings' enthusiasm. It was moments like these that reminded her why she had chosen to be part of this journey. But her pragmatic nature kicked in, reminding her of the challenges that still lay ahead. "Before we get too carried away," she interjected gently, "we should discuss the less positive responses we've been getting." The mood in the room sobered slightly. While the majority of the public and industry response to Claire's reveal had been positive, there had been some backlash. Accusations of deception, questions about the legality of their arrangement, and speculation about Claire's qualifications had all surfaced in the days following the announcement. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Right. What's the latest?" Maggie pulled up a series of news articles and social media posts on the large screen on the wall. "We're seeing a coordinated effort from some of our competitors to cast doubt on Claire's abilities and the legitimacy of her position. They're pushing the narrative that this was all a publicity stunt." Claire's face fell, the excitement from moments ago replaced by a look of hurt and frustration. "But that's not true. We've been working so hard, developing real innovations. How can they just dismiss that?" Maggie felt a surge of protectiveness towards Claire. Over the past weeks, their working relationship had deepened into a genuine friendship, and seeing Claire's pain struck a chord. "They're threatened," Maggie said firmly. "Your work is groundbreaking, and instead of competing fairly, they're trying to discredit you, but we're not going to let them." Adrian nodded, his strategic mind already at work. "Maggie's right. We need to counter this narrative head-on. Claire, I think it's time we accelerated the timeline on revealing some of your projects." Claire's eyes widened. "Are you sure? We were planning to wait until everything was perfected." "Sometimes," Maggie chimed in, drawing on her years of observing corporate politics. It's better to show your hand early, especially when your opponents are trying to stack the deck against you." The siblings looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Maggie felt a flush of pride. Her perspective was valued here. Her voice heard. "All right," Claire said, a new determination in her voice. "Let's do it. I'll talk to my team, see what we can prepare for a demonstration by the end of the week." As they delved into the details of their new strategy, Maggie couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. The secret that had once been a burden was now their strength, driving them to prove themselves in ways they never had before. The day progressed rapidly, filled with meetings, interviews, and strategy sessions. Maggie found herself constantly on the move, coordinating between departments, managing the press, and ensuring that both Adrian and Claire were prepared for every engagement. It was late afternoon when she finally had a moment to catch her breath. Standing by the window in her small but now permanent office, Maggie gazed out at the city below. The view was a constant reminder of how much her life had changed. From cleaning these windows to now having an office with a view. It was almost too much to believe. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her reverie. She turned to see Claire standing there, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "Claire? Is everything okay?" Maggie asked, concerned. Claire stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. I wanted to talk to you about everything that's happening." Maggie gestured to the small seating area, and they both sat down. "What's on your mind?" Claire was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It's just all of this attention, the pressure, the expectations. Sometimes I wonder if we made the right choice in going public." Maggie listened intently, recognizing the weight of Claire's confession. "Having doubts doesn't mean it was the wrong choice," she said gently. "It's a huge adjustment." Claire nodded, a small smile of gratitude crossing her face. "You're right, of course. It's just, before, when it was a secret, my work was just mine. Now, it feels like everyone's watching, waiting for me to either fail spectacularly or change the world overnight." "And that's exactly why you need to stay true to yourself," Maggie said, leaning forward. "Claire, I've seen your work, even if I don't understand all of it. What you're doing is incredible. Don't let the noise from outside change that." Claire's eyes welled with tears, but she blinked them back. "How do you do it, Maggie? How do you stay so grounded through all of this?" Maggie chuckled softly. "Believe me, I have my moments of panic too, but I guess I've always been an observer. Even when I was cleaning, I was watching, learning. And what I've learned is that at the end of the day, we're all just people trying to do our best." She reached out, placing a comforting hand on Claire's arm. "You're not alone in this, Claire. You have Adrian, you have your team, and you have me. We believe in you." Claire's posture relaxed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Thank you, Maggie. I don't know what we'd do without you." As Claire left, looking more centered and determined, Maggie felt a warm glow of satisfaction. This was why she had taken on this role, not for the prestige or the view, but for moments like these, where she could make a real difference. The rest of the week passed in a blur of preparation for Claire's project reveal. Maggie found herself working long hours, coordinating with the PR team, briefing security on handling the increased media presence, and acting as a sounding board for both Adrian and Claire as they refined their presentation. Finally, the day of the demonstration arrived. The anticipation in the air was palpable as tech journalists, industry leaders, and even a few politicians filed into the Starling Enterprises auditorium. Maggie stood backstage with Adrian and Claire, running through last-minute checks. "Remember," Maggie said, straightening Adrian's tie, "this isn't just about proving the doubters wrong. It's about showing the world the real Claire Starling and the future she's helping to build." Adrian nodded, squeezing his sister's shoulder supportively. "You've got this, Claire. Go show them what a Starling can do." As Claire stepped out onto the stage, the lights dimming dramatically, Maggie felt a surge of pride and nervousness. This was it, the moment that could silence their critics and cement Starling Enterprises, position at the forefront of AI innovation. Claire's voice, strong and clear, filled the auditorium. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you isn't just the future of artificial intelligence. It's a glimpse into a world where technology and humanity work in perfect harmony. As the demonstration unfolded, gasps of amazement and murmurs of excitement rippled through the audience. Maggie watched the faces of the journalists, seeing skepticism give way to genuine awe. This was more than just a tech demonstration. It was Claire Starling's debut as a visionary in her own right. When it was over, the applause was thunderous. Claire, flushed with success, made her way backstage where Adrian enveloped her in a proud hug. Maggie joined them, her heart swelling with joy at the siblings' triumph. "You did it," she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. As they basked in the afterglow of success, Maggie's phone buzzed with notifications, news alerts, social media mentions, and messages from industry contacts were pouring in. The verdict was clear. Claire Starling and Starling Enterprises had just changed the game. Later that evening, as the three of them sat in Adrian's office, sharing a quiet celebration, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a chance discovery of a secret letter to this moment of triumph, it had been a roller coaster of emotions, challenges, and growth. Adrian raised his glass in a toast. "To Claire, the brightest Starling of all." "To family," Claire added, including Maggie in her warm gaze, "both born and found." Maggie lifted her own glass, feeling a sense of belonging she had never expected to find in this world of corporate power and cutting-edge technology. "To new beginnings," she said, "and the courage to embrace them." As their glasses clinked together, Maggie knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of friendship and the glow of shared success, she felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. The secret that had once defined them was now their strength, propelling them forward into a future bright with possibility. And Maggie Thompson, once an invisible facsimile, now stood proudly as an integral part of that future, her unlikely journey a testament to the power of trust, perseverance, and the unexpected turns that life can take. The success of Claire's AI demonstration had catapulted Starling Enterprises into a new era of innovation and public interest. In the months that followed, Maggie watched with pride as the company flourished under the combined leadership of the Starling siblings. But as autumn gave way to winter, a chill settled over the city that seemed to seep into the halls of Starling Enterprises, bringing with it shadows from the past. Maggie was reviewing the day's schedule in her office when a commotion outside caught her attention. She stepped into the hallway to find a cluster of employees gathered around a television mounted on the wall, their faces a mix of shock and concern. "Breaking news," the anchor was saying, her voice grave. "Former Starling Enterprises board member, Victor Caldwell, has come forward with explosive allegations against the company's current leadership." Maggie's heart sank as she listened to the report. Caldwell, a longtime friend and associate of the late William Starling, was claiming that Adrian and Claire had manipulated their father's will, effectively staging a coup to take control of the company. Before she could process the implications, her phone buzzed with simultaneous messages from both Adrian and Claire. The siblings were calling an emergency meeting in Adrian's office. Maggie hurried down the hall, her mind racing. Victor Caldwell. The name stirred a vague memory. Hadn't she seen it somewhere in the old files she'd been organizing? She made a mental note to check later as she entered Adrian's office. The tension in the room was palpable. Adrian paced behind his desk, his usual composure cracking under the weight of anger and disbelief. Claire sat rigid in her chair, her face pale and drawn. "This is absurd," Adrian was saying as Maggie closed the door behind her. "Father trusted Caldwell. Why would he turn on us like this?" Claire shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "He never approved of me. Remember how he reacted when Father first introduced us?" Maggie cleared her throat softly, drawing their attention. "What do we know about these allegations? Is there any substance to them?" Adrian ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Maggie had come to recognize. "Nothing concrete. It's all insinuation and twisted half-truths. But Caldwell was close to our father. His words carry weight." "We need to respond," Claire said, her analytical mind kicking into gear despite her obvious distress. If we stay silent, it'll look like an admission of guilt. Maggie nodded, already pulling out her tablet to start drafting a statement. But something was nagging at her, a piece of the puzzle she couldn't quite place. "Before we do anything," she said slowly, "I think we need to dig deeper into Caldwell's history with the company. There's something off about this whole situation." Adrian looked at her curiously. "What do you mean?" "It's just a feeling," Maggie admitted. "But in my experience, when someone lashes out like this, there's usually more to the story. Give me a few hours to do some digging before we respond publicly." The siblings exchanged a look, then nodded in agreement. "Do it," Adrian said. "We trust your instincts, Maggie." As Maggie left the office, she could feel the weight of their trust on her shoulders. This wasn't just about managing a PR crisis anymore. This was about protecting the family that had taken her in, the vision they were building together. She headed straight for the company archives, a place she knew well from her days as a faxinera. The musty smell of old paper greeted her as she entered the dimly lit room. Maggie had spent countless hours here over the past months, organizing and digitizing old records as part of their transparency initiative. Now she was grateful for that intimate knowledge of the company's history. Hours passed as Maggie pored over financial reports, board meeting minutes, and personal correspondence. Her eyes burned from the strain, but she pressed on, driven by a gut feeling that the answer was here somewhere. And then, buried in a file of old memos, she found it. A series of emails between Victor Caldwell and William Starling, dating back to just before William's death. As Maggie read, her eyes widened in disbelief. She quickly gathered the relevant documents and rushed back to Adrian's office. The siblings looked up as she burst in, hope and anxiety warring in their expressions. "I found something," Maggie said, spreading the papers on Adrian's desk. "These emails. They suggest that Caldwell knew about Claire long before William's death. In fact, it looks like he was advising William to keep Claire's existence a secret permanently." Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Adrian leaned in, scanning the documents with growing anger. "He wanted Father to deny Claire her birthright," he growled, "to keep her out of the company altogether." Maggie nodded grimly. "And there's more. Look at these financial records. In the months leading up to William's death, there were several large transfers from a Starling Enterprises account to an offshore holding company, an entity that, as far as I can tell, is controlled by Caldwell." The implications hung heavy in the air. Adrian was the first to voice what they were all thinking. He was embezzling, and now he's trying to discredit us before we can uncover the full extent of his fraud. Claire stood up, a fire in her eyes that Maggie had never seen before. "We need to take this public. Not just deny his allegations, but expose him for what he really is." Maggie held up a hand, her practical nature asserting itself. "We need to be careful. These documents are compelling, but we need to make sure everything is airtight before we go public. One misstep, and Caldwell could turn this against us." Adrian nodded, already reaching for his phone. "I'll call our legal team. Get them working on this immediately. Claire, can you put together a team to audit all of our financials from the past 5 years? We need to know exactly what Caldwell's been up to." As the siblings sprang into action, Maggie felt a surge of pride. This was the Adrian and Claire she had come to admire, resilient, principled, and unafraid to face challenges head-on. The next few days were a blur of activity. Maggie found herself at the center of a whirlwind of legal consultations, financial audits, and strategy sessions. She worked tirelessly, coordinating between departments, managing the flow of information, and ensuring that Adrian and Claire had everything they needed to mount their defense and counterattack. Finally, after what felt like weeks but was only a few days, they were ready. The evidence against Caldwell was ironclad, the narrative of events clear and compelling. It was time to face the public. The press conference was set for a crisp December morning. As Maggie stood backstage with Adrian and Claire, she felt a mix of nervousness and determination. This was more than just a rebuttal of false allegations. This was a moment of truth for Starling Enterprises, a chance to show the world what they truly stood for. "Remember," Maggie said softly, straightening Adrian's tie and smoothing a wrinkle from Claire's blazer. "This isn't just about Caldwell. This is about your father's legacy and the future you're building together. Speak from the heart, and the truth will resonate." The siblings nodded, drawing strength from her words and from each other. As they stepped out to face the sea of cameras and reporters, Maggie felt a swell of emotion. These two brilliant, compassionate people had become more than just her employers. They were her family. Adrian's voice, strong and clear, filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've called you here today to address the recent allegations made against Starling Enterprises and to share some troubling discoveries of our own." As Adrian and Claire laid out the evidence, skillfully weaving together the narrative of Caldwell's deception and their own commitment to transparency and innovation, Maggie watched the faces of the assembled press. She saw skepticism give way to shock, then to a grudging respect for the Starling siblings' integrity. When it was over, the siblings fielded questions with grace and honesty, neither shying away from the difficult aspects of the situation nor attempting to sugarcoat the challenges that lay ahead. Through it all, Maggie stood nearby, a steady presence offering silent support. As they finally stepped away from the podium, the air thick with the buzz of reporters rushing to file their stories, Adrian turned to Maggie with a tired but grateful smile. "We couldn't have done this without you," he said softly. Claire nodded in agreement, reaching out to squeeze Maggie's hand. "You saw what we couldn't. You found the truth when we were too close to see it." Maggie felt a lump form in her throat, overwhelmed by their gratitude and the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. "We did this together," she said firmly. "All of us." As they made their way back to the privacy of Adrian's office, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a chance discovery of a secret letter to navigating a public scandal, it had been a roller coaster of challenges, growth, and unexpected alliances. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be investigations to manage, trust to rebuild, and a company to steer through turbulent waters. But as Maggie looked at the Starling siblings, their heads bent together as they discussed next steps, she felt a profound sense of hope. They had faced the echoes of the past and emerged stronger. Whatever the future held, Maggie knew that together, they could weather any storm. The truth had set them free, and now, unburdened by secrets and strengthened by their bond, they were ready to shape the future of Starling Enterprises, and perhaps the world, in ways they had only begun to imagine. As spring blossomed over the city, Starling Enterprises stood tall, its gleaming windows reflecting the promise of a new day. The past few months had been a whirlwind of change, challenges, and ultimately, triumph. The Caldwell scandal had been weathered, the truth revealed, and the company had emerged stronger than ever under the united leadership of Adrian and Claire Starling. Maggie Thompson stood in her office, gazing out at the cityscape she had once viewed only through the lens of a window cleaner's squeegee. The irony wasn't lost on her as she adjusted her blazer and smoothed down her skirt. Today marked exactly 1 year since she had discovered that fateful letter, setting in motion a series of events that had transformed not just her life, but the lives of everyone at Starling Enterprises. A soft knock at her door pulled her from her reverie. She turned to see Adrian and Claire entering, their faces alight with a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. "Ready for the big day?" Adrian asked, his voice warm with affection. Maggie nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "As ready as I'll ever be, though I have to admit I'm a little nervous." Claire stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Maggie's arm. "You're going to be amazing. This day is as much about you as it is about us." The three of them made their way to the grand auditorium of Starling Enterprises. Today was the company's annual shareholders meeting, but it was no ordinary gathering. Today, they would be unveiling a new initiative, one that had been months in the making and close to all their hearts. As they entered the auditorium, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Shareholders, employees, and members of the press all turned to watch as Adrian, Claire, and Maggie made their way to the stage. Maggie could feel the weight of their gazes, a mix of curiosity and respect that still felt surreal to her. Adrian stepped up to the podium first, his presence commanding as always. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed shareholders, and valued employees of Starling Enterprises, thank you for joining us on this momentous day. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Maggie with a warm smile. A year ago, our company faced one of its greatest challenges. We stood at a crossroads, our future uncertain. But it was in that moment of crisis that we discovered our greatest strength, the power of unexpected alliances and the transformative nature of trust. Claire joined her brother at the podium, her voice clear and confident. In the past year, Starling Enterprises has not only weathered the storm, but has soared to new heights. Our AI innovations have revolutionized industries. Our stock price has reached record highs, and our corporate culture has been recognized as one of the most progressive and inclusive in the tech world. A round of applause filled the auditorium. Maggie felt a swell of pride, knowing the part she had played in these achievements. But she also knew that the best was yet to come. Adrian raised a hand, quieting the crowd. But today, we're not here to rest on our laurels. We're here to announce a new initiative, one that we believe will redefine the very nature of corporate responsibility and employee empowerment. He turned, extending a hand towards Maggie. To introduce this initiative, I'd like to invite to the podium the woman who has been instrumental in shaping our vision for the future, our Chief of Staff and Director of Employee Empowerment, Maggie Thompson. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience as Maggie stepped forward. She took a deep breath, steadying herself as she faced the sea of expectant faces. This was a far cry from her days of invisible labor, but Maggie found strength in the journey that had brought her here. "Thank you, Adrian," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "A year ago, I stood in this very building, not as an executive, but as a faxinera, a cleaning woman. I had no idea then that a chance discovery would lead me on a journey from the shadows of corporate America to its very heart." She paused, letting her words sink in. "My story is not unique. In every company, there are countless individuals whose talents and potential go unrecognized, simply because of the job title they hold or the uniform they wear. Today, we aim to change that." Maggie gestured to the large screen behind her, which flickered to life with a new logo, a rising star emerging from a circle. "I'm proud to introduce the Starling Ascend program. This initiative will identify and nurture talent from every level of our organization, from the mailroom to the boardroom." As Maggie outlined the details of the program, mentorship opportunities, education grants, fast-track promotion pathways for exceptional performers, regardless of their current position, she could see the audience leaning in, their interest palpable. "But this is more than just a corporate program," Maggie continued, her passion evident in every word. "It's a commitment to seeing the potential in every individual, to fostering a culture where everyone has the opportunity to rise and shine. Because we believe that the next great idea, the next innovation that could change the world, might come from the most unexpected place." She turned, smiling at Adrian and Claire. "I stand before you today as living proof of this philosophy, and I am committed to ensuring that my story becomes not the exception, but the rule at Starling Enterprises." As Maggie concluded her speech, the auditorium erupted in applause. She could see tears in the eyes of some of the employees, particularly those in service uniforms who had perhaps never before felt so seen and valued. Adrian and Claire joined her at the podium, each placing a supportive hand on her shoulders. The image of the three of them, united in purpose and vision, was broadcast on screens throughout the auditorium and live-streamed to Starling offices around the world. In that moment, Maggie felt the full weight of the journey she had undertaken. From an invisible worker to a visible leader, from an outsider to an integral part of the Starling family. But more than that, she felt the responsibility and the excitement of the path ahead, the lives she could touch, the changes she could make. As the day wound down and the excitement of the announcement settled into a buzz of anticipation throughout the company, Maggie found herself back in Adrian's office with the Starling siblings. The three of them stood by the window, looking out at the city bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. "I still can't quite believe it sometimes," Maggie said softly. "All of this, it feels like a dream." Claire squeezed her hand gently. "It's very real, Maggie, and it's just the beginning." Adrian nodded in agreement. "You've helped us see our company and ourselves in a whole new light. The Starling Ascend program. It's going to change lives." Maggie felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For taking a chance on me, for seeing me when I was invisible." "No, Maggie," Adrian said firmly. "Thank you for seeing us, the real us, when we were hiding behind secrets and corporate masks. You didn't just find a letter that day. You found the heart of Starling Enterprises." As they stood there, the three of them bonded by shared struggles and triumphs, Maggie realized that their journey had indeed come full circle. The secret that had once threatened to tear everything apart had become the catalyst for positive change, touching lives far beyond their own. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. As darkness fell, the city came alive with twinkling lights, a fitting metaphor for the bright futures that now lay ahead for so many. Maggie Thompson, once an invisible facsimile, now stood as a beacon of hope and possibility. Her unlikely journey from the shadows to the spotlight had not only transformed her own life, but had opened doors for countless others. As she looked at Adrian and Claire, then out at the sprawling city beyond, Maggie felt a sense of peace and purpose wash over her. The path ahead would undoubtedly hold new challenges and obstacles, but she was ready to face them. For she knew now, more than ever, that the most powerful changes often begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that even the most unlikely alliances can reshape the world. The secret was out, the truth revealed, and a new chapter was beginning, not just for Maggie, Adrian, and Claire, but for every employee of Starling Enterprises who dared to dream of a brighter future. And as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Maggie made a silent promise to herself and to all those whose lives she would touch. This was only the beginning.